Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, Oceanic Monitoring Platform 9, OMP 9. Date, June 4th, 2038. It began the way most things do out here, quietly. This morning, the ocean was flat as glass. Not still in the windless sense. There were faint ripples, soft currents, but a kind of optical stillness. Light didn't scatter. It clung to the surface like syrup. For the first time in weeks, I lingered by the deck rail, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise behind a low curtain of haze. It was the kind of sunrise that looks more like memory than weather. Peach tones and pale violets drawn across the water in long, quiet strokes. I live alone on Platform 9, 400 nautical miles southeast of Tahiti. The station's official designation is a remote biogeochemical observatory, but really, it's a listening post, a place built not to intervene, but to witness. That's my role, too. Not to change anything, just to see. This morning's water temperature was 28.6 degrees C. I logged it like any other reading, but it scratched something in the back of my mind. This area used to hover around 27.8 at most in early June. Last year it rose to 28.2. This year it's still climbing. Slowly, but steadily. At first glance, everything appeared fine, but I noticed something unusual as I lowered the bucket for the surface sample. A film on the water. It moved like it had weight, not just reflection. I dipped a gloved hand in and watched the liquid stretch into strands, almost elastic. It wasn't oil. It wasn't plastic runoff. It was organic, I was certain. In the lab, under magnification, the sample came alive, literally. Tiny filamentous strands twined and recoiled, moving without propulsion. Yellowish. Coiled like hair submerged in bathwater. I assumed cyanobacteria, perhaps a common Trichodesmium erythraeum, which blooms frequently in warming seas. But the genetics didn't line up. I ran a quick barcode sequence against our onboard archive. No exact match, not even a close one. The ribosomal RNA markers had mutations. Whole base pairs swapped, like someone had rewritten their instructions with an unfamiliar dialect. A mutation? A hybrid strain? Lab contamination? I double-checked my gloves, my pipettes, even the sterilizer logs. Everything was clean. I noted a faint, sweet smell on the air. It wasn't decay. It was more like sugar and salt, like overripe melon left out in the heat. I stepped back and watched the sample curl in the dish, as though reacting to the ambient air. Alive. Hungry, maybe. Then came the trawl data. I lowered the plankton net just past the photic zone, about 20 meters down. What came back wasn't what I expected. No anchovy, no sardine, no small crustaceans, just translucent jelly. A thick bloom of Aurelia aurita, moon jellies, each barely palm-sized. Their pulsing movement felt too slow for their numbers. They didn't seem to be migrating. They seemed trapped or content. No predators, no prey. Nothing in the audio logs either. My hydrophone picked up ambient current noise, but the usual chatter, snapper clicks, shrimp pulses, even whale echoes, was absent. It was like the sea around the station had gone mute. And the birds, not one gull today, not even a distant tern. That may sound trivial, but when you live out here long enough, you come to trust the birds. They always arrive before change, or just as it begins, and when they're gone, it means something has already changed. The uplink to the satellite array failed 3 times this morning. I'm not sure if it's the weather or the growing corrosion in the dish arm. Either way, I can't send today's genetic data to the mainland yet. I've stored everything locally in the log vault for now. Maybe this is nothing. A seasonal shift. A minor bloom. An isolated variation. But I've been listening to the ocean for 12 years. And today, for the first time, it didn't speak. It watched. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 6th, 2038. The ocean doesn't die with noise. It dies with silence. For the second morning in a row, the sea gave back nothing. No gulls, no terns, no wheeling silhouettes against the dawn. I scanned the sky with binoculars from the upper deck. Clear air, empty sky. A kind of stillness has settled in, not the peaceful kind, but the held breath kind, like nature is waiting for something unseen to pass. I checked the oxygen levels just below the thermocline again, 3.4 mg/L. That's below the stress threshold for most fish. It's not catastrophic yet, but the trend line is vertical. If it dips under 2 mg/L, we start losing entire food webs. I took a second reading 3 hours later, 3.1. I performed a CTD cast, lowering the instrument array deep into the upper ocean column. The screen lit up with gradients, heat and salt combining in unstable bands. The water isn't mixing properly. There's a thermal cap holding the surface layer in place like a lid on a pot, trapping all the oxygen where photosynthesis happens, but preventing it from diffusing down. And underneath that lid, stillness. The hydrophone confirmed it again today. Not a single echo worth noting. Just the mechanical hum of the station and the soft rasp of waves against steel. Normally there's an orchestra beneath the surface. Shrimp clicks, wrasse chirps, whale moans in the deep bands. Now it's like listening to a concert hall after the audience has gone home. Just architecture and air. At midday, I took the kayak out 300 meters from the platform. It was dead calm. No swell, no chop. The paddle cut through the surface like it was oil. The water was so clear I could see 20 meters straight down, and nothing moved. No schools, no shadows, no flashes, just suspended life. Tiny particles and light distortions. It felt like floating above an empty cathedral. I paused and leaned over the edge, letting my fingers trail in the water. It was warm, too warm for comfort. A bloom of faint yellow dust clung to my skin when I pulled back. Under the scope, it was the same cyanobacteria from 2 days ago, more concentrated now, denser, forming tight spirals as though organizing. This is no longer a minor event. This is the beginning of a shift. Tonight, I walked the perimeter of the station with the work lights off, listening. No insects, no seabirds, no wind. Just the faint creak of metal in the hull and the occasional ping of salt on steel. It was like being inside the throat of a living thing that had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. The ocean feels vacant. Not dead. Vacant. And in that vacancy, something is spreading. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 8th, 2038. There's a point when the abnormal becomes familiar, when you stop asking why something is wrong and start asking how wrong it will become. I think I crossed that line today. Early this morning, I reviewed satellite snapshots from our orbital relay, partial data, fragmented through a failing connection. But what came through was enough. A faint green ribbon, barely visible against the blue, stretching along the current line like a scar. 200 kilometers long. Maybe more. Not sediment, not oil. Algae. Not just any algae. My strain. The filamentous cyanobacteria I first sampled 4 days ago. Only now it's not clustered. It's organized. It's following the thermal front, drawn like iron filings along magnetic lines. Like it knows where to go. I've started calling it the Bloom line. I ran another analysis on the newest sample. The concentration is almost 8 times higher than it was when I first recorded it. But what's more unsettling is what it's doing to the water chemistry. Surface oxygen levels dropped again, now 2.7 mg/L. The deeper layers are worse. The oxygen minimum zone is thickening, rising like a fog from below. I sent out a ping to the other ocean platforms. Silence. No data uplinks. No response from OMP3, 7, or 12. Either they're offline, or their data is being rerouted, or ignored. I left a voice request for a manual reply from the mainland. Just once, I'd like to hear another human voice. This afternoon, I went for another kayak session. Call it research, call it ritual. About 500 meters from the platform, the water turned opaque, from deep emerald to a murky olive, thick as blended spinach. Visibility dropped to nothing. The paddle dragged like I was cutting through soup. Then I saw them, millions of tiny bubbles rising from below. Not from respiration, not from fish, from decomposition. I smelled the sulfur in the air, faint but unmistakable. The sea below was dying, and the bacteria were consuming the oxygen faster than the surface could replace it. Back on board, I lowered a weighted camera drone into the murk. At 5 meters, green fog. At 10, no light at all. The feed went black, not from mechanical failure, but from lack of reflection. It was a visual void, a liquid darkness. The bloom is creating a new kind of ocean, not just killing it, rewriting it, restructuring the water column from top to bottom. Light, heat, oxygen, all decoupled from each other now. A place where photosynthesis happens at the surface, but nothing lives beneath. At sunset, I stood at the edge of the platform and looked outward. The sea glowed faintly, not with light, but with color. The line of the bloom was visible now, curling toward the horizon like a green wound. I stared at it for a long time and found myself whispering, "Where are you going?" The bloom doesn't answer, but it moves, and it never stops moving. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date: June 10th, 2038. Today I saw a cloud underwater. It wasn't metaphor, not a reflection, not plankton. It was a literal formation, a dense mass of jellyfish pulsing in unison just below the surface, sweeping northward like a flock of birds caught in a slow-motion storm. They moved as one. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, each a translucent bell flashing with pale bioluminescence. They're the only thing thriving out here now. Moon jellies mostly, Aurelia aurita, and a few comb jellies deeper down. The fish are gone. The shrimp are gone. Even the squid that usually lurk in the midwater column have vanished. But the jellies, they're multiplying, feeding on the decaying microfauna that can't outrun the oxygen drop, feeding on the silence. I watched them from the upper deck for nearly an hour. Their formation was hypnotic, spiraling like a murmuration of starlings over a cornfield. Only these had no sound, no wings, just the rhythm of the sea reshaping itself. I dropped the sampling camera again and followed them to depth. The water was a greenish bronze now, thick with particulate. Visibility was under a meter past the 10-meter mark. Even the light from the drone faded fast, absorbed by the algae's density and coloration. Below 20 meters, it was like descending into sap. I captured footage of the jelly swarm. Their bells moved in a soft cadence, like breathing. Each pulse stirred silt and sediment off the dead seafloor. Bones of small fish. Shells collapsed inward. Even their shadows seemed slower, like the ocean had thickened, resisting movement. This isn't a food chain anymore. It's a filter system. The jellies are cleaning up what's left. I ran some side tests on toxin levels. The bloom is beginning to produce trace amounts of domoic acid, likely from a secondary dinoflagellate population riding in with the cyanobacteria. That means neurotoxins are entering the food web. If there were still fish here, they'd be dying from seizures and paralysis. If people tried to eat anything caught here, they'd start hallucinating, or worse. I haven't eaten fish in weeks, not by choice, by absence. I walked the platform perimeter tonight and noticed something new. A smell. Not rotting, not sulfuric. More like wet moss and ammonia, sharp and oddly clean. The kind of smell that signals a shift in species. This isn't ocean scent anymore. It's the breath of something older. There are no more gulls, no wing beats, But I saw two albatross high overhead today, circling without landing. They must have sensed the bloom line. They didn't cry out, just circled once, then turned west. It struck me as I stood there watching them go. What if jellies are the new rulers of the sea? Not intelligent, not sentient, but dominant, immune to the apocalypse they drift through. Beautiful, ancient, and indifferent, like the bloom itself. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 12th, 2038. There's a place beneath the surface now where no life breathes. I've found it, measured it, mapped it, named it. I call it the curtain. It begins between 30 and 40 meters deep, depending on the hour and the light. Below that, oxygen drops to near zero. Not low, not reduced. Zero. What lives there now isn't what we think of as life. There are no fish, no plankton, no grazers or hunters. Only microbes, anaerobes, creatures older than air. They thrive in methane, exhale sulfur, and bloom in shadows we thought only fossils remembered. This morning, I took the main CTD array deeper than usual. The cable creaked as I watched the screen, watched the oxygen disappear in real time. Salinity rose sharply. So did turbidity. There's an entire chemical inversion occurring below the bloom line. Water that should be mixing isn't. The layering is so rigid it feels architectural. I ran a deep sensor sweep through the curtain and lost visual contact at 38.2 meters. The camera showed a sudden, complete blackout, like someone had pulled a curtain across the lens. Above, muted green. Below, black silence. It wasn't even murky. It was nothing. I hauled the drone back up and found the lights flickering. Tiny clusters of sulfur crystals had formed on the surface of the lens. That doesn't happen in oxygenated water. That only happens in anoxic brine. This isn't just a dead zone. This is a sealed biome, expanding across the ocean floor. A layer of isolation, a membrane between two worlds. Later this afternoon, I ran protein breakdown analysis on several small gelatinous samples collected just above the curtain. Results were strange. The jellyfish are starting to alter their hemolymph proteins to tolerate lower oxygen, not genetically engineered, just selected, naturally, rapidly. The bloom is not only erasing life, it's reshaping the survivors. Everything now is either dying or adapting into something else. I stood out on the west platform just before sunset. The ocean's surface was mirror flat, but the light from the sun didn't reflect like it used to. It fractured, split into pale bands across the algae film. I watched the shadows slide across the water like falling curtains. The metaphor felt literal. I wonder, how long until this curtain rises to the surface? How long until we lose the air as well? We used to think the sea kept secrets in its depth. Now I think it builds boundaries. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 14th, 2038. The ocean is still talking, but it no longer speaks in sounds. It speaks in failures. Today the main relay antenna went down. No warning. Just a long blink from the diagnostics light, then silence. When I climbed up to inspect it, I found a chalky green coating across the receiver array. Algal biomass, thick enough to block signal bands. It wasn't just clogging the surface. It had grown into the housing, threaded through the fine mesh filters like nerves searching for contact. I scraped a sample and brought it below for analysis. Under the scope, the filaments pulsed, slowly, faintly. They weren't moving from wind or water pressure. They were contracting, rhythmic, coordinated, as if responding to interference. Some of the filaments even curled in response to heat from the microscope's light. Cyanobacteria don't behave like that, not without genetic tampering. But there's no lab signature in these strands, no CRISPR residue, no synthetic tag. This is natural, Or worse, this is adaptive evolution at hyperspeed. I tried to log the event and transmit the data to the mainland. No connection. I tried the backup shortwave. No response. I scanned every frequency band I had access to, open marine, scientific, civilian. Nothing. The silence isn't just local anymore. At noon, I turned to the emergency relay drone, a small solar-powered UAV designed to carry secure message capsules to mainland receivers. I wrote a short burst log of the last 6 days, bloom data, oxygen levels, drone video stills, all tagged, urgent, anoxic expansion confirmed. I watched the drone spiral up into the sky, its path vanishing into the haze like a bird flying into a painting. I don't know if it made it. I don't know who's left to read it. And then, just after sundown, the hydrophone crackled, not with normal marine sound, not with cetacean signals or background currents. It came through as intermittent pulses, slow, deliberate, low-frequency bands. At first I thought it was seismic, tectonic rumblings from the trench, but the pattern didn't match. These weren't chaotic. They were measured. Precise. 4 seconds apart, then 6, then 4 again. I recorded 30 minutes of the sequence, looped it, ran a fast Fourier transform. The signal repeated in harmonics that matched, strangely, the rate of bacterial cell division under oxygen stress. Could it be biological? Could the bloom be transmitting signals, internally or externally, by altering the properties of seawater itself? I don't have the tools to decode it, but I listened to the playback in the lab. Just a hum, a throb, a quiet low chime. It felt familiar, like an echo of machinery, or breath. My skin rose in gooseflesh as the tone repeated. There was nothing threatening about it, but it didn't feel random. Later, I walked to the far edge of the station. The lights stayed off. I looked out over the Black Sea and imagined the algae, billions of microscopic cells drifting together, aligning to currents, feeding, dividing, listening, responding. What if we're not witnessing a collapse? What if we're witnessing a convergence? Nature is not dead out here. It's awake. Just different. And we've lost the frequency to understand it. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 16th, 2038. There is a boundary down there. Not a chemical line, not a temperature shift, not even an oxygen threshold. It's harder to name, but I felt it. This morning, I launched the Perseus, my compact submersible drone, for a free dive along the bloom line's underside. It took 5 hours to recharge its capacitors. Solar power has grown unreliable since the haze thickened. The surface sky no longer gives us clean light. Everything now is indirect, diffused, like living beneath frosted glass. As the drone descended, I monitored its feed from the lab. A grainy cascade of increasingly dim green, then yellow-brown, then full darkness. Nothing new at first, until it passed 60 meters. That's when it entered the phantom layer. I call it that because the drone's onboard sonar, cameras, and acoustic sensors all began to fail. Not entirely, but erratically. Visuals showed strange warping, like heat shimmer underwater. Straight lines curved. Echoes bounced late. The sound signal that returned was off, as though it passed through something that wasn't there. A volume of water with no index. The light from the drone's LEDs scattered strangely. Not absorbed, not reflected, but redirected. Like it was entering a different density of fluid. Or perhaps something gelatinous, but invisible. Even the compass readings began to drift. A 10-degree wobble to the east, despite calm conditions. At 66 meters, the Perseus picked up structures, not solid, not fixed, more like clusters, amorphous, pulsing aggregations of biomass. They didn't resemble any jellyfish or known plankton colony. I froze the frame. It showed a sort of hollow column, rotating slowly in place like a siphon, rimmed with microfilaments trailing upward toward the surface. It was almost beautiful, like a sea organ, breathing. The data logger began skipping frames. I attempted manual override, but the drone was no longer responding. Then the depth gauge began to rise, not fall. The drone was ascending on its own, slowly, drifting upward without propulsion, as if something had gently released it. I recovered it 20 minutes later, hovering near the thermocline. On inspection, its surface was clean. No damage, no corrosion. But the memory card? Corrupted. Not wiped. Fragmented. Audio logs were filled with white noise and irregular pulse tones, nearly identical to the hydrophone pattern I'd recorded 2 nights ago. So I asked myself, what if the bloom isn't just consuming? What if it's building? Building structure, building density, building form. And what if this phantom layer, this suspended veil beneath the curtain, isn't just passive water, but the framework of a new architecture? I've stopped calling the bloom it in my private notes. I call it they now. Because deep down, I no longer believe I'm alone out here, not in the human sense, not in the biological sense, but in the sense that something beneath the bloom is aware, and it has begun to take shape. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 18th, 2038. This morning, I set out for the reef. 10 kilometers west of the platform lies Reef Zeta, a patchwork of shallow coral structures once monitored by our station twice monthly. It used to be a biodiversity hotbed. Neon parrotfish, hammerhead patrols, anemones dancing like fireworks in the surge. It was never pristine, but it was resilient. I thought if anything survived, it would be there. The ride took 40 minutes by motor launch. The ocean was unnervingly still. The haze hung low over the surface like a fog that refused to lift. Beneath it, the sea glimmered with that now familiar green skin. No waves, no birds, no signs of movement but my own wake. I anchored above the reef coordinates and suited up. Visibility at depth was 5 meters. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The coral field was a graveyard. Not bleached, crumbled. Entire fans of Acropora had collapsed into silt. What remained were brittle white stubs, like bone fragments pressed into the seafloor. Even the sediment was wrong. Too loose, too fine. Like the reef had been ground down from within. And the silence, it was complete. Not a single darting wrasse. No snapping shrimp. No distant whale pulse. The ocean here had become a negative space, a sculpture of what once lived, now shaped only by its absence. I swam slowly along the old transect markers, the painted metal flags half buried in soft lime dust. In places, coral structures had warped into impossible curves, melted shapes that looked like fingers trying to reach the surface. I don't know if it was heat stress, acidification, or something else entirely. Midway through the dive, I found a cluster of brittle stars lying motionless in a shallow cavity. They weren't dead, not entirely. Their arms twitched faintly in slow waves, but they made no effort to move, to flee, to hide. It was like their instinct had been dulled, their purpose dissolved. Even the scavengers were giving up. At the far end of the reef shelf, near the trench edge, I came upon something stranger. A single large porites boulder coral, still upright, but hollowed from within. The outer skeleton remained intact, but the interior had collapsed into a glutinous yellow-green mass. I sampled it carefully. The tissue pulsed under the blade, not from current, but from internal motion. Back at the station, I analyzed the structure. It was infested with cyanobacteria, but more disturbingly, they weren't feeding on the coral. They were replacing it. Layer by layer, the bloom was growing within the skeleton, filling the void left by the dying polyps, mimicking their structure. I stared at the slide for an hour. This isn't death anymore. It's replication. The bloom doesn't just consume. It inherits. It takes the shapes that used to live and fills them with its own substance, like muscle growing into a cast. like ghost coral wearing the reef as memory. And if it can do that to coral, how long until it tries to fill us? Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 20th, 2038. Something has shifted in the sky. I noticed it yesterday, standing on the west platform just before noon. The clouds seemed off, not in shape or movement, but in color. A dull olive tint traced the bottoms of the cumulus shelves, like a pale infection bleeding into the atmosphere. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a watercolor wash behind glass. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Today, the satellite relay finally reconnected for just under 90 seconds. It downloaded partial composite weather data. Most of it was corrupted, but one image got through. A wide-angle thermal and chlorophyll overlay of the central South Pacific. And there it was. The bloom had gone atmospheric. What I saw looked like a planet-scale watercolor smear, great bands of chlorophyll, a concentration stretching across surface currents and carried into the air by evaporation. Not dust, not sand, not volcanic, plankton. Lifted skyward by vapor exchange and turbulence. Algal compounds in the cloud base. Aerosolized biomass. It's not just the ocean anymore. The sky is starting to bloom. I ran an air sample from the station's intake mesh. The filters came back slick with organic residue. Fine, oily, faintly fluorescent, under UV. A mix of terpenes, oxidized lipids, and trace dimethyl sulfide. Normally, you'd find these compounds in marine air during bloom events. But this was different. It wasn't just offshore drift. These were living fragments, spores, filaments, microcapsules, too heavy to remain suspended long, but dense enough to ride the right storm. The bloom was seeding the sky like a forest throws pollen, like a continent throws smoke. The implications are staggering. In the lab, I activated the particle spectrometer and watched the data flow in. Each gust of air brought new readings, peaks in microbial mass, spikes in volatile organic compounds, even faint traces of nitrogen fixation agents, the kind used by cyanobacteria to transform air into nutrient fuel. If these readings hold, the bloom may be actively terraforming the boundary between ocean and sky. And with it comes the next fear: weather destabilization. If the upper air layers are altered, if moisture dynamics shift due to biological interference, we'll begin to see changes in rain cycles, in sunlight penetration, in storm structure. Already, the last 3 sunrises have come up pale, diffused, colorless, and each evening the haze glows a little longer than it should. Tonight, while filtering another air sample, I noticed something unexpected: a single tiny droplet forming on the edge of the station rail. I watched as it condensed, then slipped and fell to the deck. When I touched it, my fingers came away sticky. It wasn't dew, it was marine condensation. Plankton rain, a slow, microscopic storm. I wiped the deck clean. But when I stepped inside, I realized something chilling. The bloom isn't just reaching upward, it's beginning to fall back down. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 22nd, 2038. I smelled sulfur in the lab today. Not strong, not rotten. More like the dry, metallic scent of hot springs or scorched eggshells. Faint at first, then building until I could taste it. I checked the station's pressure valves. No leaks, no combustion. The scent was coming from the intake filters, from the air. I ran a compressed sample through the chromatography kit. The result was clear: hydrogen sulfide, a byproduct of sulfate-reducing bacteria. It's a marker for one thing: anaerobic respiration. That's when I knew. The anaerobes had arrived. I spent the morning preparing water samples from just beneath the curtain layer. Under the microscope, the living field pulsed with dense bacterial colonies: Desulfovibrio, Clostridium, and another strain I couldn't identify. These are organisms that don't just survive without oxygen. They require its absence. They use sulfur instead of air. They thrived in the oceans 2 billion years ago, before fish, before lungs, before us. And now, here they are again. Not hiding, not rare, dominant. The bloom has created the conditions for their return. An old ocean, rising beneath a newer one. A second world, ancient and self-sufficient, layered beneath our collapsing system, like a backup copy from a forgotten era. I've been calling it the anaerobe's prayer, this slow, sulfur-rich inversion of life. It's not a cry for help. It's not even a warning. It's a hymn, sung by bacteria who remember a time before oxygen, before predators, before complexity, and it's spreading. Even the sediment samples collected yesterday show signs of deep microbial turnover. Oxygen traces are down to less than 0.4 milligol below 50 meters. The seafloor sludge bubbles faintly now, releasing tiny bursts of methane and hydrogen sulfide like soft underwater sighs. I ran a scan of the acoustic field tonight, just for comfort. I hoped, maybe foolishly, for the sound of a distant whale. But all I heard was the low throb of the bloom. That pulsed rhythm has stabilized now, like a heartbeat or a chant. And then, something new. At 1:03 a.m., the hydrophone captured a sudden flutter in the signal, a brief harmony, almost melodic. Not language, not music, but something that resembled timing, a kind of call and response. Not from animals, from the ocean itself. Could these anaerobes, organizing, communicating, reshaping, be forming something larger, a distributed intelligence, a microbial neural web beneath the sea? I remember my graduate work on stromatolites, layered microbial mats from the Precambrian era. They weren't just passive fossils. They were collective organisms, using gradients of light and pressure to make decisions. Crude, slow decisions. But still, decisions. And this bloom, this field of anaerobic breath, it may be something like that. A memory made alive again. Tonight I sat on the deck for hours without moving. The air was warm, dense, and tasted faintly of minerals. Above me, the sky pulsed with green vapor clouds, and below, the sea glowed without light. I no longer know what we're witnessing. A disaster, a resurrection, a reset. Maybe the end of our world isn't fire or ice. Maybe it's the quiet return of a more patient one. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 24th, 2038. It reached the coast. This morning, I intercepted a shortwave burst from a maritime relay out of Tahiti. Garbled and cut off, but the phrase came through clear. Red tide. Shoreline coded. Multiple casualties. I stood there, hand still on the dial, heart hammering. A red tide. That's what they're calling it. But this is no ordinary dinoflagellate bloom. This isn't just biotoxin buildup in shellfish or a localized fish die-off. From the transmission, the event is massive. A shoreline foam event that lasted 3 hours, then burned off with the heat of the afternoon. They said it left a rust-colored band nearly a meter thick on the beaches. Entire fishing villages evacuated. Dogs dead. Children coughing up blood. Eyes burning. No rain. No wind. Just a wall of biological vapor that came in from the sea, and then disappeared. There was a second phrase in the relay before it cut out. The water moved, and it didn't come back. Back on the platform, I examined my own intake filters. The airflow system has begun to fail intermittently, clogged again by aerosol bloom fragments. The residue is thicker now, oxidized red instead of green. My chemical analysis returned high levels of polyether toxins, similar to brevetoxins, but more complex. These are the same compounds that cause neurological disruption in marine mammals. I found them on the deck rail. I found them in the rain bucket. They're in the air now. And the red tint isn't just chemical, it's cellular. The bloom has entered a new phase, evolved pigmentation. That means it's adapting light absorption, switching from surface photosynthesis to atmospheric harvesting. It no longer needs only water. It's moved upward. It's learning to breathe our air. I recorded the local weather data this afternoon. Wind, none. Temperature, 32 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 94%. Visibility, less than 1 kilometers. The haze has a faint hue now, rosy in the late sun, like a bruised cloud pressing against the horizon. And yet, no rain. The sky is heavy, pregnant with something other, but the pressure never breaks. No thunder, no lightning, just stillness, like a storm with no courage, or a breath held too long. I reviewed drone footage from yesterday's scout flight westward. In one frame, as the drone banks, you can see the color boundary across the ocean, a clear red overtone on the surface water, creeping in from the open Pacific like paint poured into the sea. And then, a shape. In the upper corner of the frame, just for a moment, a pattern in the red bloom. Circular, spiraled, vast, a kind of bloom vortex or gyre, rotating slowly, maybe 20 kilometers wide. I enhanced the footage, but it's degraded. Still, the symmetry was unmistakable. It wasn't random. It wasn't wind. It looked intentional. I couldn't sleep tonight. I walked the perimeter until midnight, under that pale, colorless sky. No stars, no surf, no horizon, just a crimson halo at the edge of everything. I whispered to myself without knowing why. We taught the ocean how to die. Now it's teaching us how to disappear. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP 9. Date, June 26, 2038. I woke to silence. Not the usual kind, the ocean's kind, full of breath and rhythm. This was different. The machine had stopped. The first thing I noticed was the air. Humid, unmoving, stale. The fans were off. The lights were out. No hum from the desalination rig. No vibration under the floor plates. Just the soft clink of metal expanding in the sun. Even the sea beyond the window looked frozen. I climbed up to the power station. The solar array was coated in green again, thicker this time. The cells were suffocating beneath a fine layer of bloom dust, dry and crusted like desert salt. The emergency batteries had drained overnight. The system shut down at 03:12 a.m. precisely. I cleared one panel by hand, then another, but it was too late for a full recharge. Even the light in the sky had changed, no longer golden or clean. It was pale and flat, like the sun was trying to shine through a skin of algae. The station was out of breath. No more filtration, no more satellite sync, and most urgently, no more water. The desalination unit had been working overtime since the first bloom haze reached the platform. It was pulling in raw ocean, boiling, condensing, cycling. But now the intake vents are clogged, choked with filament and oil-slick plankton sludge. The filters hissed and failed sometime in the night. I opened the hatch this morning and nearly gagged. The brine tank smelled like a compost pile. Sulfur, ammonia, organic rot. There's a taste in the air now. Like metal. Like old battery. Like the edge of something electric and dead. I began collecting rainwater from the overhead drainage channels, but there's been no rain in days, only haze. I scraped condensation from the outer walls, funneled it through a makeshift cloth filter. It took an hour to collect half a cup. The water was warm, slightly yellowed, and left a faint slime on the bottle. I drank it anyway. The human body can survive on 500 milliliters a day. I'll try to stretch it to that. Inside the lab, the computers are cold. Even the backup relay system won't boot. I scribble notes now by hand. It's almost comforting. Pen to paper. The old analog ritual of recording collapse. There's a kind of dignity in it. The ocean outside continues without me. Wider. Redder. Quieter. I sat in the engine bay at noon and listened. Not for the machines, but for the water. The station groans now. not from current or wind, but from internal strain, as if the salt and bloom are pushing inward, swelling the seams. I imagine the sea slowly digesting the platform, not in anger, in indifference. It reminds me of an old line from a philosophy text I read in undergrad. Civilization ends not with a scream, but with maintenance overdue. Well, maintenance is overdue. The machine has stopped, and I am all that's left of its rhythm. I've begun rationing my time. 10 minutes in the lab, 10 minutes in shade, 15 on the deck gathering moisture. The rest I spend staring at the sea, listening for motion, waiting for a breeze. But there is nothing now. Only light, heat, haze, and the soft pulse of something alive beyond understanding. If the bloom is watching, it must see me now as part of the station. Another system shutting down. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 28th, 2038. The food web has snapped. Not strained, not stretched, snapped. Everything we built on the ocean's foundation, every network, every balance, every assumption about what eats, what and how fast, has come undone. It began with the krill. I reviewed a final data package stored on the backup array from OMP7, dated 6 days before it went silent. It recorded a massive die-off, hundreds of square kilometers of pelagic krill, floating just beneath the surface in a red haze. Their bodies weren't whole. They had dissolved from within, cells ruptured by toxin uptake, gut flora destabilized by bacterial invasion. Krill are the backbone of the open ocean. Their biomass exceeds that of all humans combined, and now they are gone. With them go the shearwaters, the penguins, the blue whales. Even if they could still migrate, what would they eat? I've seen no cetacean echoes in the hydrophone band for over a week. No songs, no clicks. Just the long, low murmur of water folding in on itself. The birds were the last to hold on. I found 2 of them yesterday. A pair of storm petrels, collapsed on the northern rail, wings spread, eyes glazed. Their bodies were coated in a fine green film. I pressed one gently, and a puff of red mist escaped from its beak. It wasn't blood. It was bloom foam. That's when I realized the collapse wasn't just predation loss. It was replacement. The bloom isn't killing the food web like a fire. It's suffocating it like a tide. It doesn't burn the structure. It seeps into it. It takes what feeds and replaces it with what filters. The jellyfish, the bacterial mats, the microbenthic sludge. They're thriving. Passive, efficient, slow-motion life. They don't hunt. They don't chase. They absorb. They are the new consumers. I ran a biological index scan using the limited lab power I could still route from the solar battery. Of the 20 core species this station tracked when I first arrived, zooplankton, bony fish, forage stock, only 4 returned even partial traces, and all 4 were severely altered. One copepod sample now produces a gelatin sheath instead of a chitin shell. Another shows signs of oxygen-independent ATP metabolism, a pre-eukaryotic pathway. The sea is returning to its default state. Not ours. Its. I walked the station perimeter at dusk. No wind. The water was warm to the touch, thicker than before. I dropped a hand line, more out of habit than hope. It came back empty, coated in slime. I sat for hours listening to an old recording I made last year, humpback songs, playful and fluid, recorded in the deep season. I played it through my portable speaker into the void, just to hear life again, just to remember. No response came, no echo, no recognition. It occurred to me then that the whales might still be out there, not singing, not moving, just drifting in silence, confused, waiting for a signal that will never return. Or worse, they've already begun to rot from within, consumed by the very water they once ruled. The trophic collapse is total. But it doesn't feel like an apocalypse. It feels like a change in leadership. Journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, June 30th, 2038. There's a stillness today that feels ancient. The machines have failed. The birds are gone. The data feeds are quiet. And yet the sea has never been more alive, just not with life as we knew it. It's becoming clearer with each passing hour. This isn't the death of the ocean. It's a reversion, a return to what it once was, long before our ships carved paths, before reefs rose from calcium and time, before oxygen turned breath into rhythm. I spent the early hours combing through the last fully recorded water columns I had stored before the main systems failed. The vertical profile shows a near total inversion. The upper layer, warm, acidic, nutrient-rich, is completely saturated with photosynthetic bloom. Below that, a layer of pure anoxia. No oxygen, no movement, no structure, just dense microbial fluid. Beneath that, the beginnings of sulfuric stratification. It matches geological models from the Proterozoic era, 3 billion years ago, a time when microbial mats ruled the shallow seas and the deep ocean was a place of chemical alchemy. Life back then wasn't divided by predator and prey. It existed in gradients, in shadows, in sludge and slow fermentation. That ocean has come back. The old sea has returned, and we were simply in the way. This afternoon, I climbed the mast and stared outward with my binoculars. To the northeast, I saw something that shook me to the core, a floating field of gelatinous life, kilometers wide. Not just jellyfish, not just bloom scum, a tapestry of coalescing mats, drifting in rhythm. It looked organized, threaded, breathing. I swear I saw patterns ripple across its surface, hexagonal pulses, spiraling waves. Not chaos, choreography. I called out, reflex, hope, desperation. But nothing turned, nothing rose. It simply continued, folding in on itself and disappearing into the haze. Later, I revisited the coral samples from Reef Zeta. Even after refrigeration, the interior mass continues to pulse, faintly. I placed a mic near the sample and recorded a frequency, 1.8 hertz, almost below audible range. A heartbeat, or a clock. The bloom isn't passive. It's not just consuming, it's counting. Maybe this is what Gaia always meant. Not balance, not homeostasis, but reset. The moment when life strips down to its base layer and begins again from cell in silence. There's nothing left to manage here. No power, no feed, no plan. And yet, I've never felt more purposeful. I've started recording everything by hand, sketches, diagrams, loose notations about filament behavior and trophic realignment. It's all going into a steel case sealed against corrosion. I'll tie it to the station's anchor column, not to preserve hope, but to preserve record, the truth of what came and what may come again. When the sun fell tonight, I stood on the deck barefoot. The sea was completely flat, breathing in soft, slow exhalations. Above me, the sky no longer held stars, only a dull green-gray pulse behind the mist, like the entire atmosphere had become a membrane. I whispered aloud, "Welcome back." Because whatever this is, whatever's rising through the plankton and haze, it is older than us and far more patient. Final journal entry. Dr. Eliot Varn, OMP9. Date, July 2nd, 2038. This will be my last entry. Not because the bloom has taken me. Not yet. But because there's nothing more to record that would still belong to the world we knew. The ocean has become a single, endless breath. There are no tides now, no breaks in the wind, only inhalation, green and slow and warm. This morning, I awoke to a new light. Not sunlight, not even haze, The sky was glowing, the color of moss under shadow, diffused and humming. I climbed to the mast again and saw what I can only describe as a ceiling. A membrane stretching over the horizon, high in the atmosphere, faintly translucent. It pulsed like a lung. Above it, the sun was gone. Not blocked. Irrelevant. I believe the bloom has entered its final phase, atmospheric stabilization. It no longer needs ocean currents or weather patterns. It has made the planet its vessel, wrapping it in biology, in filtration, in totality. The platform is coated now. Every rail, every hatch, every solar panel now wears a soft, slick skin, fine as velvet, but faintly iridescent. It doesn't choke the structure. It embraces it. I think it recognizes me as no longer a threat. Or maybe it never saw me as one. I've stopped wearing gloves, stopped sterilizing the lab. The air is thick with microbial content, yet I no longer cough. No more nausea. No more headaches. I should be failing, but somehow I feel balanced, like something in me has been gently overwritten. At first I feared assimilation. Now, I wonder if this is what symbiosis feels like. I've packed the last of my notes, drawings, charts, thoughts that no longer matter in any practical sense, into a rust-sealed case. I've tied it to the platform's mooring line. If it survives, let it be found. Let it say this: we were here. We watched. We bore witness to the sea reclaiming itself. Because this was never an extinction event. It was a correction, a rebalancing, a long-forgotten memory of Earth reasserting itself in color and breath and bloom. The ocean is no longer blue. It is alive. Completely. Continuously. From the mesopelagic to the sky itself, it has rewritten the planet's vocabulary. And I, Dr. Eliot Varn, last biologist of Platform 9, offer no resistance. I sat today on the bow of the station, legs dangling over the edge, watching the surface ripple with patterns I no longer try to interpret. They are not for me. They never were. But in their rhythm, I hear something. A language, not of words, but of forever. The bloom never ends. And now, neither do I.